Well done, everyone. I'm so impressed that we've got so many people who are here and present and contributing, and you've not long to go now. It's been a great couple of days, but I just want to thank you for still being here and still contributing, and if we could continue to invite you, I would really appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to take us through to part 3 with, and we're going to make this interactive. And I want to just get you just to stop for a wee minute and to take yourself back to yesterday morning when we started. And I just want you to have a think about our opening, our starting, how important that was, and then to look and say each of the sessions. So we started with our opening, then we brought in, help me, I would like you to tell me, because actually, so who was our first speaker over here table? Remember, we're back to the Joe. Okay, we had Joe and Carolyn welcomed us, and then we had Michael. That's right. And then what did we do after Michael? Next page. International panel. That's right. And so international panel. So I want you to keep thinking and remembering each of what you held then, and then after the international panel, what did we do? We had lunch. We had in town. Yes. Okay, that was in town. We had the DHBs. We had the DHBs, and then we had in town. And so I want you just to pause a bit, just close your eyes, just think about each of those, because it's going to be important in a minute. And then we had Ashley. Okay. So that was a really big day. And then we had Thursday, actually, which again was another, wonderful speaker that we had. So just hold those and think about that for a wee minute. And then we started today and we went into human factors, and then we went into culture. So you've had lots of discussion. I want you to hold all of these. And then we went into a bit of our journey about where we've been, and we looked and we were quite amazed about how much has happened in this short space of time. And then the boys took us through roles, and then we talked a bit about future and keep, stop and start. And now what I want you to do is just think about that, and I want you individually, there's stickies on your paper. I want you to individually, without talking to anybody, just for a few minutes, just reflecting on the 2 days, and I want you to write down on one sticky, you can do as many as you like, what has surprised or has energised you. And we're going to collect these and we're going to talk to them, but individually, what has surprised or energised you over the 2 days? And then on another sticky, I want you to think about what should we turn our focus to in the coming months to improve our MIQ response. I want you to think about it from your perspective. And then I want you to think about on a third sticky, what commitment you will make as a leader in MIQ going forward. So we're going to take 5 minutes, and if we just do that, because you will be sharing them, but I want you to focus first on your own thoughts and thinking. No sharing yet. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to stand up and I'd like you to find one person that you hardly talked to in the last couple of days. I want you to pair up with somebody that you haven't had a lot of conversation, and I want you to both share what you've written down. So we're going to do that for the next, and I want you to do it standing up. So stand up, find somebody that you haven't had lots of conversation with and share what you've written. I think what I really think is somebody else. And then I'm going to get them to go to different tables. So I don't want to be and then it'll take a little bit of time to take it there and then from there. No, I'll be finished like one after making it. I think got them going, isn't it? Oh, yeah, because tonight well, I just think that this time, getting to the end, we want them to actually think about it. But sort of now I'm going to get them to what I'm trying to wait. That's so far. On the bed. Yes, yeah, well, that's right, but even what it must be into the same. Okay, thanks very much. Yeah. I think, no, sit down, Russell. Just, and now I want you to go with your peer. I want you to go to a table close with a lot of people that you haven't necessarily, but just try with your peer, go to a table, and then we're going to, each of the peers will share a couple of things at the table, and I want you to write some of it down on the sheets of paper. Thanks. Just to clarify, I heard somebody miss the instructions. So in the peer that you're in, if you find a table, and it's not just the same table that you were at, find a table and sit down with some different people, and then I want your table to write down something from each year on one of those questions.
People got an interview in here with it's like being able to contribute to the paper. Tomorrow I've got my lecture from my top of the tomorrow I'm actually saying what's the next phase or getting someone to write. I don't get what we lost. One and we have a presentation of we've so really need to I don't know it to bits, but and really upset well, no, I think I was she's done amazing as a making a lot of yeah, exactly. So that's what on the side of it.
As a result of the last.
I think the next one I'm going to read directly through what I want to say is that there are actually, but there's a whole lot of people that have these without each one. And I heard Andy saying that and I'm really pleased with the way some like was giving us some more anyway, and like, yeah, this is everybody. Testament. No, that's right. That's it. I have a clue what my emails are. Yeah. Yes, because this is regulated. It's not
Okay, we'll just give it another minute or so if you can make sure everybody's had a chance to share something, and then we're going to do some feedback. Okay, thanks everyone. What we'll do is we're going to start at that table, and what I'd like you to do is just to share one thing from each of the questions from your table. Yeah. Sorry, we can't hear.
The surprise was how long it's going to go on for. Process, we thought a good process was, the focus is on process, on decision making, especially around new policies. We should be at a stage now, we know we get surprises, from the politicians, but a lot of it should be in training. And we should have a good process for evaluating new policy implementation timings. We should be doing better at that. And the commitment, a lot of it was around good start. So commitment good start, and we tried to take a profile about who's going to see this through, and there's no hands went up. I think that's because we actually know we're all going to see it through. So, yeah.
Okay, we were surprised and energised by the variety of people and passions in this room, and skill sets, and the level of commitments, being the special type of people that ran towards it rather than away. The focus is, I think, tackling workforce stigma and staff well-being around vision. We need to put longevity into the team, and we didn't make it to the third one, so I'm just going to bring it home. Be a good follower. I think takes leadership to be a good follower as well. So be a good.
Thank you.
So we had surprised in terms of some of the local innovations happening with DHBs and RICs and regions. We had focused on building a one-team approach, and our commitment was to be receptive to new ideas.
Thanks, Fiona.
We were surprised and energised by the appetite for one culture for MIQ. Turning our focus is looking at the future state, getting ahead and looking at some options for that. And one thing that sort of resonated through all of our points as commitments as leaders was a focus on our people and their wellbeing.
Thank you.
We're running up really fast. Our surprise was probably a growing understanding of what each functionality does in this room, both national, regional. The number two was to look at the speak up or just culture implementation, which is great again. And third one was around reducing the them and us tensions into MIQ.
For us, this one?
Is that on? Yeah.
The surprising and energising part, which was common across everybody, was how common the shared experiences are, but also the combination of that with the openness and dedication to keep forging on. In terms of the focus, big focus on building for that future that we acknowledge is longer than next couple of weeks. So let's just actually start doing that with multi-agency planning groups, looking at, you know, what's going to come our way instead of what's happening tomorrow. And then the third, it's difficult, and there's lots of individual leaders here, but keeping the conversations going, making sure that there is more proactive positivity in terms of the celebration of success, and making sure that the reality of the front line is inputted into policy decisions, operational decisions.
Thanks, Jules.
We were really energised by the dedication, the passion and the common purpose of the room as well. And then we had a little bit of a thing around the expert disagreement, how they all had such different views, but didn't seem to be together to debate it, which is interesting. We, in terms of number two, thought a blueprint for the plan so we can stop being misreactive, defining MIQ as a workforce, a culture, sustainable system, and we're talking about the end of bed and looking forward that we're doing so well. And then the last one was really about that positive messaging externally for our teams in the community and keep pushing for that. We know that they don't always pick up those nicer stories, but the more we talk about it, the more they hopefully will. So, and keep talking. We've now met people across the system that we can engage with, we can collaborate with, we can all together champion MIQ and create the true MIQ culture, and be an agile living innovation.
Thanks, Lisa. And well done, everyone, and thanks for that. So before I hand over to Megan, just what we've done with the teams and recording is that we are hoping to take, we are going to take that, and our MD Comms is going to put it into a video link, so they'll reduce it to and put it into a link that we can then share more broadly. We also will have a link to the presentations that have been on so that people can utilise those. We'll do, there'll be obviously a bit of a report just to, you know, talk about, summarise our experience and some of the things that we've come up with. We'll take the We'll take those and we'll collate them. And we'll take what you've put today as some areas. So we will find a way, the collective we will find a way to come up with something that will help us remember what we've done, and we'll get that out. And hopefully we'll do it in quite a timely way, because otherwise we're away from this and you lose focus. What I encourage you to do, though, is to go back and share as soon as you get back what your experience has been, so that, you know, as we've talked about, it's our people that want to understand it. And we want to look and do a bit of summary. It's been phenomenal how many people have come into this, so understand their experience as well and how it works. So I'm going to hand over to Megan to close off before the Minister. We don't forget, we do have the Minister, and then Sam's going to finish off in a way that's going to fit.
Yeah, and I think if you've got good questions for the minister that you can ask, and I'm not answering. Because I'm one of the few permanent MIQ employees. I don't have a job to go back to. Jim's going to kick off.
I'm going to kick off because I have to go at 3:30 to to a appointment. It's just a couple of reflections for me on a fantastic couple of days. You know, Megan's going to do a better wrap up of this. Take the opportunity. We're very hard on ourselves a lot, especially when you come into an environment we get the chance to look at how we operate against the holes in our own way of operating. So I just like to flip that over and say, fundamentally, our system is not broken. It's a highly successful MIQ operation. I think globally, it is absolutely admired and recognised as a big part of our organisational strategy. So beat ourselves up as leaders as much as we like. When we go back out there, we do have to champion what the system it is a really good system full of really good people. So that's always heartening. The keep, stop, start. I just want to go one keep, stop, start in relation to myth managers. And I'd say this with a green uniform on, let's put it to bed. So whilst we look at stopping the myth management rotation continuity issue, can I ask that you keep training, supporting, encouraging, mentoring, and soft leadership of those myth managers in their jobs out in the midst? In order to allow us to then, look at a more sustainable model, which we're moving to, and maybe start giving them a bit of a cuddle every once in a while. Some of these guys are doing 80, 90 hours a week in a myth. That's a big ask, and it's a hard thing to replace. So I just ask that you do that. And remember, these are young leaders who are going back into a workforce, and we need to develop them and look after them as well. Can I also ask, as leaders for all of us, and my reflection always coming out of these is around my leadership level. What are my accountabilities and responsibilities at my level? And then what are my responsibilities to support and enable leaders as peers or at maybe a lower level as a leader? So I just ask if you put that lens on, what am I accountable and responsible for? How can I support and enable down or up? That's maybe give some clarity. I got asked the comms Hui last week, those classic questions of, what keeps you awake at night type thing. And I love that flip over of what keeps you up in the morning. And it's easy here with the triple P. It's not the private-public partnership, but it's that purpose, passion, people. And that should, for all of us, I think you see in this room, just come through in space, is, our purpose is pretty clear. Keep COVID out, let people in. Look after our people, look after our returnees, look after our communities. So we keep that going, I think it's great. And then with the people that we've got, we're on to a winner. When you look at that piece of work we did before, you look at who's been in the system for quite a while, we are getting really good stability in our system through the longevity of some of our leadership at a national and regional level. I'd like to acknowledge those people that have been in it since the start or who are in it, like Megan, like Andy, like a number of the leadership team for the next year. It's a huge commitment to make, but it provides leadership stability for us at a national and I think at a regional level as well. So to all those people that are committed, for the next year, my utmost respect and thanks for that. I will be parachuting out next month as part of my secondment with Defence to the finishes. So I'd actually like to point at Rose down the back there. So Rose will come in and replace me in early June. On a very deserved promotion to help the next 6 months of MIQ go along to support Megan and the team and the whole MIQ system move forward. So all the best for that, Rose. And thank you very much for a fantastic couple of days. My highlight was the regional briefs yesterday, the stories. It's awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. These aren't my reflections, but bus timetables. So because we'll have the minister coming in shortly, and that will then be time to close out our session with Sam, I think. Yes. So we'll do the administrative now. So the people who need to get to the airport, We've got 3 shuttles leaving after this session. Shuttle 1 is at 4:05. How am I doing? For Pers ready to leave then. Yeah, but my walk happy and everything. Yeah, Shuttle 2 at 16:40, and I know you don't say PM now, into that. We'll leave at 4:40 PM. Shuttle 3, 17:15, we'll leave at 5:15 PM. And if you miss any of those, you're in an Uber, I'm afraid, or a cab. So 4:05, 4:40, 5:15. I guess if one's full weight for the next one, it's first in best dressed, I think. And thank you for that. So some thank yous. Obviously a day like this doesn't happen without a lot of effort going in beforehand, and we didn't bring in a fancy consultant or facilitator to do this. This is very much grassroots, and so many people have had input into today. That's part of what makes it really special and, dare I say, successful. It's by us, for us. But I'd like to shout out in particular to some of the people who've worked really hard for quite a while to get today up and running. So starting with Leanne, our admin extraordinaire. And our tech support people who we put straight onto the high wire yesterday with using MB technology to do an international panel with a video and whatever else we were trying to do at the same time. So thank you. And in terms of putting together the content for today, I will miss people, so I apologise, but so we've had Lisa, Anthea, Pete, Catherine, Mel, Uli, who all, and Matt, so I knew I'd miss people, who've all had direct input into how we've structured these sessions and what we wanted out of them as a group. So, really hats off to all of you. When I looked at the agenda, I said to Tess, what are we doing on day 2? But she said, leave it with us. This is bottom-up leadership or something. Anyway, yes. And so, it's really paid off because the people who are involved in putting it together, know MIQ. And also our presenters, our facilitators, our organisers, the people who've been helping clear the tables away so that things stay a bit decent. But last of all, Tess, who had the idea some time ago to turn what was going to be a smaller event into this. So really, Tess, this is testament to your determination, at times stubbornness, and persistence in the face of a fair bit of competing priorities and competing demands. So thank you, Tess. And to all of you for the contribution, the energy, attendance, the fact you're still here, you haven't gotten early flights to get home because, it is a bit of a drag when you've got to get back to something like Auckland in particular. Anyway, but you'll find the traffic won't be too bad getting to the airport here. So thank you to all of you. It's the contributions of everyone in the room that's made the last couple of days really special. I wasn't going to do the wrap up, so some of what, but I was going to introduce the minister. So I've been trying to separate out my wrap up from how I'm going to introduce the minister. So I apologise in advance if I repeat any jokes or anything. I don't have many. So key themes, I've done buses, I've done thank yous. One of my takeaways from the last couple of days. Well, first of all, I apologise for not being particularly interesting yesterday because I hadn't had any sleep for a couple of days because I have an old dog who's been quite sick, and that resulted in a lot of mopping the floors for a couple of nights. Anyway, so he's drugged up and I had sleep last night, so I felt much more able to be part of proceedings today. What I've taken away from these couple of days, apart from the passion of the people here, is the uncertainty we're in you know, I personally can't think of anything I've ever been part of before that's been more uncertain than VUCA. It isn't really the half of it. I mean, it's like VUCA was designed for COVID. And so, you know, the dedication, the passion to be part of something that's so uncertain makes it extra special that you're all effectively committed. So you might not have asked to be part of it, but you've chosen to stay part of it for as long as you have. And, you know, as Jim said, we're getting quite a cohort of people who've been around quite a while now, and that rules quite a memory lane. And one of the, you know, for me, this shift from what was an all-of-government response where people just did what needed to be done into us now questioning what's the sustainable model, you know, what's our culture, what's our workforce model, how do we want to do this into the future? You know, it may be around 4 years, but if it is here in 4 years, it's certainly not going to look the same as it is today. And so there's, you know, there's real challenges there around what do we want to invest time and effort in making a permanent-ish process or system versus what can we just get away with doing as a minimum viable product. And we'll probably keep grappling with those questions, and there'll be a lot of hindsight at the end of all this. And I'm sure in the Royal Commission it'll really come out what we should have done a year ago. So keep taking those notes for your interviews. But you know, I said we need to keep that wall. But you know, whether it's the facilities or the workforce, we've made it work. And I think someone today said, you know, it's not going to be perfect, but we've made it work with what we've had. And you know, that's been the secret to how we've gotten to here. You know, I'm really interested in exploring further the discussions we've had around the culture of MIQ. It's not MBIE's culture, it's not Defence's culture, it's not Tinder's culture, although theirs is pretty good. But you know, what's the culture we want for MIQ? And you know, loud and clear, it's about supporting our workers to make MIQ a success, because this is a people business. And if we support our workers, then they can support people I still call returnees. I know that is becoming less relevant over time, but that's the key to our success. And so so that will inevitably be our focus, whether they're seconded or borrowed or stolen or recruited. That's the key. And that learning system. So we're not defaulting to, you know, naming the facility, naming the employer, you know, almost down to, you know, naming the suburb that the person lives in. How do we get that learning system where we're really upfront every time that we're learning as we go, and that we're constantly improving without it sounding like we're reacting. More focus on why, on our unifying purpose in the information we put out. And I really liked Matt's extension of something that I can't remember who it was that said it yesterday, because I was quite tired yesterday. But good science, courageous political leadership, and a skilled and engaged workforce. And that really sums up what we're doing. And you know, shortly we'll hear from what frankly has been pretty courageous political leadership. You think back to the decision that was made last year to ask everybody to stay home. You know, that's pretty courageous, and I think, you know, we're still doing things. And I hope you got this sense yesterday from the international panel that as we learn and adapt, we're doing things that are world leading in this space. And we have been asked for help from other countries that have headed down this path. We've had conversations with the UK, with Ireland, with Canada, with Australia. Pardon?
Fiji.
Anyone else? People are interested in what we're doing. It's a rather reluctant conversation from Australia, it's fair to say. But you know, there's a lot for us to be incredibly proud of, and we're doing things that haven't been done elsewhere yet. One of the things that we did really early on that Australia is just working on is the welcome packs for returnees. You know, they're pretty special things, and we're working on a children's version, which is one of those sort of throwaway ideas a little while ago, but it's turned into something that, you know, the comms team here in Wellington are really passionate about. And we just need to get Lynley Dodd on board, and then we're fine. Do we know anyone in the education sector who can help with that? Oh, yeah. Welcome, Minister. You know, we've also heard that the relentlessness makes it hard. You know, And I had these notes before I knew that I would be talking before you came in, Minister. You know, we set up a strategy session with our Minister in order to talk about the future, and then something happens and we end up talking about bathroom extraction fans with the Minister instead. So the relentlessness of the incidents that we have to respond to makes it really hard to look ahead. But I think we all feel quite galvanised from the last couple of days that we need to carve out that time and be really deliberate about both the future of MIQ and the legacy we leave. That was about it. Personally, it's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's also absolutely the most rewarding. And I know from the conversations I've had over the last couple of days that I'm not the only one who feels like that. But now, as we get to the end of our day, and remember those bus times, 16:05, 16:40 and 17:15, for all Perths going to the airport.
Just briefly, before you introduce the Minister, I think I can speak on behalf of all of us to say thank you, Megan and Jim and Tess and the rest of the MIQ leadership team. Thank you for putting this on, because I found it enormously valuable, and I'm sure everybody here would agree. So thank you.
And as we get to the end of our day, I'm really delighted to welcome the Honourable Chris Hipkins, the Minister for COVID-19 response, to provide our closing address for our first ever MIQ Leadership Forum. So Minister, here we've got Defence Force, you can pick them pretty easily, although I'm trying to be. New Zealand Police, Ministry of Health, our 5 DHBs that are directly involved in MIQ, AVSEC, we've got a core, we've got Jetpark, we've got MBIE, we're all part of the MIQ whānau. And many of the people here have been involved since MIQ really stood up on day one back in early March. So we've got a lot of history here. We've also got a lot of new blood, and I think it's important in this game to have a bit of a mix. We've heard from a range of experts over the last couple of days. We've heard from Professor Michael Baker, Dr. David Nabarro, who's the COVID Special Envoy to the World Health Organisation. We've heard from Susie Wiles. We had an international panel with the UK, Singapore and New South Wales. We heard from our very own Dr. Ian Town, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield and Ms. Carolyn Tremaine. We had a panel with the DHBs giving unique perspectives on the stories that they're hearing and able to tell from their experience. We've talked through human factors and how we build systems that are less reliant on making sure individuals don't fail. We've had a bit of a discussion about that F word. We've talked about how we create a culture of learning and improving and not blaming and looking at system improvements. We've talked about having an MIQ culture and how we can develop that and make the sum of the organisations greater than the parts. How we go from what started out a bit of a disparate bunch of people who are all thrown together to do something into one team with that common purpose. That's a pretty strong purpose. We've reflected on our fast-paced journey, on the challenges of rapid idea to reality, some of which starts at 1 PM and turns into the reality quite quickly thereafter, into a world where we want to embed sustainable, repeatable, safe processes that don't break the bank or break the people trying to deliver them. And we've speculated quite a bit on the future. So if you've got any intel on our future, Minister, that would be awesome. And, to some extent, we've heard that things will get worse before they get better globally, uncertainty about the world post this acute COVID stage, and something about 20,000 novel coronaviruses in the animal kingdom, which I can't really get out of my mind. But there's opportunity as well out of this, and that's probably what's most exciting. The things we're learning that are often world leading here in MIQ, and we've got a lot to be proud of, and we'd love to hand over to you, Minister, to help wrap up our 2 days. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan, and thank you, everybody. It's fantastic to be here with you. Maybe I thought I'd start. I just want to do 3 things. I thought I'd reflect a little bit on where we've been over the last year, talk a little bit about where we might be going in the future, and then just share a few other sort of reflections on day-to-day reality, if you like, that we're dealing with at the moment. I first started thinking about this whole concept of MIQ actually about 2 years ago. My wife, who some of you may have met, was working at the Ministry of Health doing something called pandemic planning, which I didn't really know or understand, and she was at home having an animated conversation with me, which I was only half listening to, about what we would do in the event that this thing called a pandemic happened and we had to shut the border and we had to isolate people when they arrived and stuff. And I just sort of said, I think we never do that. And well, here we are. But it really was quite a journey and a very rapid acceleration when we found ourselves having to deal with COVID-19. And I think back to February last year, when we were on a trip up to Waitangi, or Waitangi Day, and the Prime Minister called a special cabinet teleconference very early February, and the discussion at that point was to restrict travel between New Zealand and China. And that was an enormous conversation. It took us several hours, and it just felt like such a monumental decision because we had never before, no New Zealand government had ever before closed the border between New Zealand and another country. So this was a whole new thing for us. And yet only a few weeks later, we were basically closing the border to just about everybody. And that was the speed with which things were happening. And the response, I think, from all of those involved in figuring out how to do what we were asking to have happen was really incredible. Standing up at MIQ, the health response, scaling up testing to an incredible rate, looking at our health preparedness, making sure that, in the event that the worst happened, that we had ventilators and we had all of the things that we would need, that, oxygen that other countries are currently grappling with. And our public service as a whole, I count everybody in this room, even if you're, from a commercial background, within that, did us all as a country really proud. And I'm really, really grateful for the efforts that people put in. I want to acknowledge that along their way, there are some people who've made significant personal sacrifices as part of that effort. And I also want to acknowledge the stories that have come back to me of people working in managed isolation who have found that an incredibly stigmatising and lonely job to do. When I've had, in my other capacity as Minister of Education, reports of kids being bullied at school because their parents worked in an MIQ facility, those sorts of things really upset me because actually, far from being bullied, those kids should be being thanked for the contribution that their parents are making. And so you will have always heard whenever there's been an issue, shall we say, around MIQ, that I've been very keen to defend the workforce of MIQ because mistakes will happen. At the end of the day, we're in a human business. And you can never have when you're dealing with human beings and human behaviour, you can never have something that's 100% foolproof. And so what you have to do is respond and react, and you put the best safeguards in place possible. But then when things go wrong, you just have to reflect honestly on what happened and make sure as much as you can that the same mistake doesn't get repeated again. And yep, there have been incidents along the way that we've had to manage. But I take some satisfaction from the fact that each time we deal with a new issue, it is genuinely a new issue. It's not like we can say, well, this is what we dealt with this issue 2 weeks ago and this is how we dealt with it, because by and large, if we dealt with it 2 weeks ago, we worked out why it happened and we tried to fix that problem so it didn't happen again. So the next issue that we're dealing with is something different. And that, I think, is again a tribute to the way everybody involved in MIQ, involved in our COVID-19 response, has been learning on the job and figuring out how to adapt to any new challenges that have come along. So just on behalf of the government, really, and on behalf, I think, of all New Zealanders, thank you to all of you, and thank you to all of the people that you work with. This is a really, really important part of our COVID-19 response. We would not be sitting in a room like this, enjoying all the freedoms that we currently do, the ability to come together, were it not for the role that MIQ plays in keeping COVID-19 out of New Zealand. And so thank you. In terms of where we go in the future, there's a lot of conversation about that at the moment, and you've heard from the epidemiologists. We don't yet really know exactly what the next 12 to 18 months is going to look like. We know that we'll probably be doing MIQ for a while. We may not be doing MIQ for everybody that's coming into the country, but we'll be doing it for some time. So we've seen one shift already with Trans-Tasman, so we're no longer requiring people travelling Trans-Tasman to go into MIQ. We'll shortly expand that to the Cook Islands. Then there's the potential to expand into other Pacific countries, and we'll explore that. And then there's actually some other countries further afield who potentially could fall into that safe zone at some point in the foreseeable future. Then there's the potential for vaccines to play a role. If people are fully vaccinated, if they're coming from a low-risk country, if they can meet certain criteria, maybe we'll be in a position to say, you don't need to go into managed isolation when you arrive. And then we may get to the point where we say, actually, we can scale back or even turn off managed isolation for a period of time. But I think, as Megan just alluded to, we do need to think about a world in which we may have to do this again. And maybe not on the scale that we are doing it now, but maybe on some scale, maybe responding in a more targeted way to an event that might happen. And one of, I think, the big challenges for us and the big opportunities for us in the next 12 to 18 months is to make sure that we're really baking in the lessons that we've learned from this experience, so that if we have to do it again, we're not starting from a blank page again. We're actually starting well ahead, having captured all of the knowledge and experience that we've that's been generated through this process. The next pandemic might not look like this one. You know, we might be dealing with a different health issue that requires some different responses. But we've got to make sure we capture the lessons that we've learned here. That involves thinking about what kind of redundancy, if you like, or what kind of contingency do we need to have available in the event that we need to do it. If you were going to design a managed isolation facility from scratch rather than repurpose a hotel to use as a managed isolation facility, what would that look like? Would you build it slightly differently? How do we capture those lessons now? Because actually there may be opportunities for us to have those facilities built, used for something else when we don't need to use them as MIQ facilities, probably as hotels. But it might be that you build the hotel to a slightly different specification so that in the event that you need to, you can convert it into a managed isolation facility. So the air conditioning system, it might look and feel like a hotel, but the air conditioning system might be different, or it might have slightly different common space layouts and different egress to what a typical hotel would have. So we've got that opportunity to think about that at the moment and to capture what we've learned here and say, well, if we were over time to make sure that we had that capacity there in the event that we needed it again, what might that look like? So I think those are our challenges for the next sort of 12 months or so, regardless of what happens with the border. Making sure that we're prepared for something to happen again in the future, and making sure that we continue to do a really good job of what we're doing now for those who need it, regardless of how many they may be. The final thing I wanted to reflect on is just in the notes, I think, someone asked the question, what's it like being Minister for COVID-19? And invited me to share some reflections on that. And so I thought I'll share them just briefly, perhaps by explaining a typical day in my life as Minister for COVID-19 response, because I think many of you will see what happens at sort of the user's end, if you like, or the recipient's end. And it's always interesting, I think, to understand exactly what goes into all of that. So, as Minister for COVID-19 response, on a day when something is happening, let's just say something has happened, it's generally will it happen by now, and we'll be figuring out what to do about it. That will normally start for me sometime around 6 a.m. And I'll normally need to be in Wellington by about 6:30. I live in Upper Hutt, so I'll get picked up at about 6 a.m. And then we'll start with the round of morning media interviews. So you do Radio New Zealand and News Talk ZB pre-recorded, and they will normally broadcast them just after 7 o'clock. And then the TV channels will be live just after 7 o'clock, normally from the V5 Theaterette. I then go up to my office, maybe grab a bit of breakfast on the way, and then get into the day's kind of more usual activities. So my usual parliamentary day would start at about 8:45. And that's when we have our meeting to decide what's going to happen in Parliament that day. one of my other roles is the leader of the House. So that's where I determine what Parliament's agenda for the day is going to be, what questions there'll be, what bills we're going to debate, who's going to do which speeches, and all of that kind of stuff. The morning's normally taken up with cabinet committees or caucus meetings and so on. And if something COVID-19 related is happening, normally around about 11 a.m, 11:30 a.m, we'll have a Zoom call with all those who are involved in the response. You might think, why 11 a.m? Why not as soon as you get to the office? Well, as soon as I get to the office, that's normally when everyone else is getting to the office too. And actually, if I had a Zoom call with them right at that time, they probably wouldn't have as much to tell me as they're going to have to tell me after they've had a few hours to figure it out by 11. So we'll typically do that at about 11. About 12:30, we'll start preparing for the 1 o'clock briefing. So if something's happening with COVID-19, there'll be a 1 o'clock briefing, and we pull in relevant people. Sometimes we'll do it via Zoom, depending on where people are. Sometimes we'll do that in my office. Spend about half an hour figuring out the script, getting any information that we need together. Then we do the 1 o'clock briefing, and then that normally takes to about 1:40. I'll go back to my office then and prepare for question time. Question time in Parliament starts at 2. Normally, if there's something COVID-19 related happening, there'll be questions in Parliament about that. The good news is the media conference that I've just finished will normally cover all the questions that I might get asked in Parliament. So the preparation time doesn't take as long as normal, which is good as well, because I wouldn't have as long as normal to prepare. Question time takes from 2 till 3. Then get back to my office. You have a little bit of time for more regular meetings and so on. And then around 4:30, the afternoon media will start. So all the drive time shows, and so you have to do all of the drive time shows to explain what's going on and so on. Then dinner time, and then sort of a catch up on the day, reflection on what do we need to know by tomorrow morning, potentially another Zoom call if we need to have another Zoom call, and then normally home when Parliament finishes at 10 p.m, and then next morning you start the process all over again. And that'll go on for as long as there is something we're responding to. And the good news is we're getting quicker at responding to things. So, but when you're in, say, the midst of dealing with an outbreak, that'll be every day for a period of a couple of weeks until we've figured out what's happening. So the reason I wanted to share all of that with you is I think sometimes people who are working in roles where we're asking you to give us information want to know why it is that we have to produce that information in such a hurry, and why is it that you're making all of these really unreasonable demands on us all of the time. And it's just probably a reflection of the fact that we're now living in a 24-hour news cycle where the appetite for more information and the inability to control the flow of information is a very real one. So if we're not providing the latest information, the media will go somewhere else to get it. And therefore, they'll often get it wrong. And we won't know what it is that they're doing. And therefore, the information that New Zealanders gets confused. And so the reason that we work under such pressure to try and keep control of that flow of information is simply so that people are getting the right information from a source that they can trust. And then I know that puts all of you under an enormous amount of pressure when it's you that's at the receiving end of all of those requests, and you need to turn that around really quickly. But the ultimate, I guess the ultimate reason for that is that's been integral to the success of what we have done, that ability to be able to communicate quickly and clearly to people about what's been happening. And then also, to actually deal with whatever the issue is. Time is of the essence, as all of you know, when you're dealing with COVID-19. The faster you can figure out who's got it, where are they, and who have they been into contact with, then the faster you can shut it down and we'll get back to normal again. So those are just some observations, and I guess I'll just end where I started, and I'm happy to have a few questions. I figure you've got about 12 minutes before you have to get ready to go. Thank you, really, is the final message. This is tough. It's certainly the toughest job I've ever done, but like Megan actually, and for many of you, it'll be one of the toughest things that you will have had to do in your working lives as well. And I want to acknowledge that, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Any questions? I'm sure there are a couple. Okay, I will ask it. Now remember I said before, I don't have another job to go back to. it was really helpful to get a sense of your day. I think we're all a bit more tired having heard that day. And so thank you for what you're doing and the support you give us. But it doesn't happen very often, but there are times where the decision-making process is so fast in your neck of the woods that it can be that decisions are being made up to a 1 p.m. announcement.
Yeah.
And so we've talked about how we can get more involvement early on. I think there's there's something for the Wellington-based MIQ people to take away is how do we quickly grab the feedback from around the country. But is there anything we could be doing to help inform earlier, not so much to change the policy decision, but maybe to change the implementation timeframe or the expectations around how fast it will get implemented?
Yeah, sure. I think I hear you. And look, I think we are probably getting a bit better at understanding some of that as well. You know, that sometimes you do need a bit more time to do things properly rather than to do them in a hurry. What I've generally tried to do is receive feedback about that and actually try and be a little bit flexible. So when people are coming back to me and say, look, we know what you want to do, we know why you want to do it, but we just can't do it within that time frame but here's what we can do. Particularly if you can meet us halfway and say, well, we can do this bit, but not that bit. Then I think we have to be responsive to that as well. Recognise that what we're asking for isn't always possible too. So the skill of anticipation, though, is one that's hugely undervalued. You know, that ability to look at the situation and say, I can see where this is going to land up in 48 hours, and so let's go straight there. The ability to do that is something that some of you will have more ability to do than we do, in fact, because of the very real experiences you will have. So that, again, the more you can do that and say, well, look, let's not wait until we're asked to do something or to get ready to do something, because there's a pretty likely chance that as this unfolds, this is where we're going to land up. So you can take some license there and be ready for it. So.
Any other questions for Melissa? On focus, Jess at CDHP. I just picking up on you thanking us all, and you are the Minister of many things, and one of them is public service, and the announcement around pay freeze for us all in the public service. The impact on workforce who have been heavily impacted by the role they're played in this response, particularly to discrimination. But I think that was almost the final blow for a number of people. Whether there's any consideration around reconsidering.
Yeah. So look, I'll accept some responsibility and some regret here for the way all of that was communicated. We've never talked about a pay freeze. I acknowledge that that's the way it's been presented. That has not ever been the government's intention. So if you go and look at the pay restraint guidance that's been issued by the Public Service Commission, it acknowledges that there is room for pay increases, and it specifies the sort of circumstances in which a pay increase would be given. But if I really talk about the underlying motivation for why we're even having this conversation, governments are always going to have a limited amount of money for pay increases, and we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar pay bill every year. And there's always going to be a limited amount of money. So the question becomes, where can you best put that extra funding for pay increases? And particularly in the current environment where we as a country are spending more than we're earning, and we're going to do that for some time. You've got to make sure that any extra spending you're doing and any extra money you put in salaries, you're trying to direct them to the most important and the most in need. And what we know is over the last 3 years, when we've had some big salary settlements, to give you an example, the teachers and nurses alone, put those two together, that's $4.2 billion went into those two most recent settlements over a 5-year period. We know that those settlements increased the gap between the lowest paid in those workforces and the highest paid in those workforces, because the increases at the top were larger than the increases at the bottom. And what we're trying to do is turn that around, so that we're not saying there should be no increases for everybody, but we are saying we want to tilt them towards those lowest paid people in those areas, and in fact right the way across the public service. Because if you've got a cost of living adjustment, for example, if you were to, there's two different ways that you can calculate that. You can say, what's a fair increase in the cost of living? And you can give that dollar amount to people. Or you can say, oh, well, CPI is running at 2%, therefore everyone should get a 2% pay rise. If you're earning $90,000 a year, your 2% pay rise is going to be worth double the 2% pay rise of someone earning 45,000. So the income gap will grow. And that's what's happened over the last 3.5 years when we have had these big settlements. And so we're trying to tilt the spectrum the other way towards those on low pay. That doesn't mean that we're saying that there should be no cost of living recognition for everybody else. We're just saying if there's going to be increases, it should be at the lower end. Now, in all of that, the communication of all of that got lost. And I'll accept some responsibility for that, as my ministerial colleagues have also done. But I think in the way we presented that, it was able to be picked up and conveyed convey a message that we acknowledge.
We have time for one more question to the Minister.
Thank you, Minister. Ingrid Harder, I work here in South Street, number 5. I have a question about public trust and confidence. And we can only do what we're doing in MIQ because we have an amount of public trust and confidence in the license to operate. And that comes from the decisions that are made and how they're communicated, as much as what we do and how we do what we do, how we interact with the community. So we're all in it together in terms of maintaining that. I'm interested in what you see as some of the top risks to us maintaining public trust and confidence, and what we should be thinking about in terms of how we operate.
A couple of things in there. One is, I talked about the speed of the need to get information and sort of control the flow of information. And I don't mean that in a sort of a Stalinist style way. I mean, if you can be the authoritative ones issuing the information, and people can have trust and confidence in that, then that certainly helps. If, on the other hand, people feel like we're not being upfront and honest with them, then they'll lose trust and confidence in us, which again comes back to sometimes the speed is a part of that. I think we've always said from the beginning of this that we're going to be learning as we're doing. There's no handbook for this, so we're literally making it up as you go along. And as long as we're learning as we go along as well, we're not repeating the same mistakes twice. Generally, the public have been willing to tolerate mistakes along the way. My sense is that as we get further and further into this, and we're doing it for longer, that public tolerance of mistakes is going to get smaller than it was in the beginning. And so that, I think, is one of the biggest risks for us. The things that happened at the beginning, were they to happen now, we wouldn't get the same degree of public saying, oh, that's understandable. And so that's something that we've all got to be attuned to. We've all got to make sure that we're looking ahead and not saying what has gone wrong and how do we fix it, but what could go wrong and how do we stop that thing from going wrong? How do we normalise this? And again, it comes back to some of the comments that I made about workforce earlier. We're still, in some areas, relying on a bit of a crisis approach to the workforce, which is that when something happens, you just throw everybody at it and everybody gets absolutely knackered. And we could still be doing this for a while, and so we've got to normalise that so that people don't end up being completely burnt out every time something happens. We have to find a way of making our response normal. And I say that as the biggest hypocrite in all of this because, as I just indicated to you, when something happens, there's no second me. I'm there right the way through that, and I end up exhausted at the end of it too. But I think the bigger the workforce, we're talking about a big workforce amongst all of you now, we've got to be able to spread that load so that we don't wear people out. That's something I'm very, very conscious of. I think it's a big risk for us across the public service. We've got a number of people that are just knackered.
Thank you, Dennis. I really appreciate you making the time to come and talk to us. A really nice way to close our first ever, and hopefully we don't have too many, of our MIQ leadership forums. But it sounds like we might be getting together again. I have a funny feeling we're going to have another Christmas party.
I think so.
And let's acknowledge the Minister. And on that note, can we have like a military countdown? It's 4 minutes, 50 seconds, 3 minus 4 and 50 to bus 1 starts. So, I know we'll all disperse and go back to our various posts in the world of MIQ, but I hope you go away with a good feeling about today. Think about those things that have really resonated with you. It'd be great to share some of the messages from today with the broader MIQ whānau. And the Royal We will pull together some key messages and things that will help in that conversation. But I can assure you that also as a leadership team, we'll be really reflecting on what we've heard and some of the changes that aren't that hard to make, but will help with that joined upness without dragging everyone into every decision about, which brand of tea bags to have, but actually getting that sense of understanding we're in it together. And we've got a sense of the direction, the main direction we're heading in. And, then you can actually see, like the rest of us, the mistakes we made along the way. So that would be lovely. So thanks everyone and safe travels. And that was my way of handing over to Sam.
That's right. The boss is gone. Look, we can have a truncated goodbye this afternoon. The people who need to be thanked and acknowledged have. Someone else on your behalf has stood up and said, whakahoki te me, giving it back this way, and your applause endorsed that. I just want to leave you with this one message. MIQ business is winding down in the next few minutes, and that's us, that's ours. But I just want you to remember that we're in this house, and all of those people up there, they know that you're here. So when you go back and talk to those people, let them know that these people here understand that you were here as well. Because we've got a different identity, but inside, in terms of whare, it's like a wharepuni. Once you walk in there, that's it. You're right. And the locals will just walk out and leave us here. Let us know when you go. Okay, so that's that. I won't say anything more. And whakakorori tia tariki o koutou e ngā tāuiwi. Whakakorori tia tariki o koutou e ngā hunga katoa. O te mea kua whakakahingi e tōna tawhai a tātou. Ai mawana te pono o te ariki a kea. Kororia ki te matua me te tamaiti, me te weiru atapu. Me te timatanga no kia pera o kia rega pera ke ake. Ai ngā taumatunga kore. Amen. Kia piki te ora, kia piki te kaha, kia piki te maramatanga. People catching the 16:05 bus. Ai oi.